Now let's move on to Clover in her essay on The Final Girl. According to Clover, viewers perform cross-gender identifications, and this occurs through both the killer/monster and the victim/hero. Neither one is what he or she seems to be. The killer or the monster is often a feminized male, a transvestite, transsexual, or otherwise impaired, quote-unquote, in gender identification. So, for instance, in Silence of the Lambs, you have a killer who is uncertain in his gender identification. The victim/hero is often a masculinized female, the final girl. This character provides a double for the adolescent male. The final girl is masculine enough to go on an edible journey as a surrogate, but has a female body upon which masochistic fantasies of the male spectator may be enacted. Quote, the final girl is apparently female, not despite the maleness of the audience, but because of it. So we get a character with whom the male audience can identify. So Clover uses Kaja Silverman to argue that there is a sense of lack displaced onto women, that this is a projection of the masochism the male subject feels. The victim is the focus of attention, and subjugation is experienced as a pleasurable repetition of the spectator's history. The final girl, through ambiguous and changing gender identity, allows the male spectator to oscillate between feminine and masculine positions. So gender is not fixed, either for the character or for the audience. And this ability to oscillate between positions speaks to male anxieties and desires, rather than to feminist advances. The emergence of this character, however, does suggest an evidence of a shift in the representation of gender, even if only for the male viewer. So this final girl allows the male spectator to shift in identification, to not just identify with the monster, the killer, but with the protagonist of the film, who is generally this final girl. In talking about Alien and the final girl, Clover argues that the film combines horror and science fiction, the slasher survivor, and the heroic astronaut. Ripley, again as the final girl of Clover's piece, is the first to face the monster alone, by herself. The others have aid from their comrades in arms. Although Dallas goes off by himself to try and find the monster, he still has allies helping him. Clover asks, is Ripley a woman in man's clothing? Is she a male surrogate, as Clover argues about the final girl? Is she masculinized so the male audience can identify with her? So if we're trying to apply Clover to Alien, we need to ask these questions. Clover says the final girl is simply an agreed-upon fiction, and the male viewer's use of her as a vehicle for his own sadomasochistic fantasies is an act of perhaps timeless dishonesty. Ripley's survival winds up working as an apology for the violence and voyeurism performed upon the crew of the Nostromo during the film. Ripley relieves fantasy-induced guilt for all of that raping and killing that occurred for our pleasure, for the audience's pleasure. Bring out Gallardo and Smith, whom I discussed earlier in their book Alien Woman. They argue that Ripley represents a new woman hero of her time, of the 1970s, along with Charlie's Angels and along with Wonder Woman, that there were different audience responses, that women responded to the transgression represented by Ripley while men responded to her sexualization by the end of the film. Alien was not intended as a feminist film or as a movie for women, and male audiences had not previously been asked to identify with a female protagonist, according to Gallardo and Smith. And so, one question we might ask is, well, what about Lambert, right, the hysterical woman? Gallardo and Smith say, no, Lambert doesn't offset Ripley, that Dallas is, as I've mentioned in the design for Alien, Geiger purposely constructed these to look like female body parts. The ship entrances are described in Geiger's text as, quote, vagina-like openings, unquote, complete with, quote, an inner and outer vulva, unquote. And that's getting pretty specific. Already alluded to this quote by O'Bannon, who co-wrote the script. He argues that he wrote the face hugger as he did to, quote, make the men in the audience cross their legs, unquote. And Gallardo and Smith write that this gesture points to the castration threat represented by the alien. Gallardo and Smith also argue that space exploration is identified in Alien as a sexual enterprise, that it represents the mysterious feminine. And they bring up the image of the egg that is used for the picture, for the poster for Alien. It advertises, according to Gallardo and Smith, the evil Urwomb. It gives birth and men die, unquote. The creature becomes a nightmare version of sex and death, a relentless reproductive machine. It subdues and opens the male body. It impregnates and explodes through it. In its adult form, you have that again, that phallic tongue and the vagina dentata combined. The vagina dentata is combined with the image of the phallic woman and, quote, monstrous gender. So in Alien, we have rape, pregnancy, birth, and mothering narratives combined. These are acted out on the male body, thus resulting in the distinction between male and female beginning to blur. Jimena Gallardo and C. Jason Smith write, this is the site of the alien horror. Faced with the alien, we are all feminized, unquote. With the birth scene, this erased sexual distinction and, quote, invoked cultural anxieties about the subversion of male power by visually representing the male body as a site of rape and birth, unquote. This questions then what it means to be human. The sexed body is no longer primary if there's no need for difference, if difference is meaningless. We might also discuss the coded rape scenes of Ripley and of Lambert, where Ash is trying to shove the rolled up magazine, down her throat, trying to kill her, and then obviously after that Ash gets killed, gets beheaded, basically. In the scene that I'm referring to with Lambert is the scene, of course, right before she is killed, where you have the alien's tail wrapping around her leg and slithering up her body. Again, a phallic image suggesting a more disturbing death for Lambert. Then, too, there is the objectification of Ripley's body at the end, which we pointed towards last time. Certainly sexualizing her. Previous to that, she has been wearing rather gender-neutral clothing. But she is feminized at the end of the film with that strip down, and then with laying down in the pod as she does. And Gallardo and Smith write that Cain is under the attack of the monstrous maternal. A mobile placenta, the facehugger's underside member, acts like an umbilical cord, keeping Cain alive, but in a state of coma. The horror of Cain's situation stems partly from being reduced to a powerless baby. Cain has thus regressed to an earlier stage of sexual organization where his body is inseparable from the mother's body. He has been enwombed, unquote. And so think back to our discussion of the abject and the need for the infant to separate itself from the mother's body, to objectify it. Here we have the reversal of that process in which we make Cain the baby. It's also made more horrifying by the fact that he's a guy. to see a man made passive, to see a man treated in the way that Cain is treated, goes against a lot of our cultural codes about men's bodies. And so the combination of male and female in this situation results in horror, results in a sense of transgression. Dallas will authorize Ash's actions that might kill Cain. A cutscene has Dallas pleading for Ripley to kill him. He's cocooned. That death is preferable to the threat of the alien and its emasculation of the men, because that's part of what I'm talking about here, is that the men are emasculated even as someone like Ripley is made stronger and more powerful. That's the director's version of Alien that has Ripley coming across the members of the Nostromo cocooned. So again, Gallardo and Smith write, the alien species disregards the sexual difference that is so essential to our definition of what it is to be human. The male body is repositioned to correspond to the female body. The male mouth becomes the vagina, his chest the womb. The dichotomy male/female is broken down as all humanity is female and that it is a womb in the face of the alien, unquote. So again, that idea of the alien as abject, as working against borders and boundaries, against law, order, rules, etc. One might argue also that Ripley is not only fighting the alien, but the crippling forces of patriarchy, as represented by the faceless company, Mother, and Ash, the robot. Ash also questions the state of the subject within a technocratic, capitalistic society. Employees are represented as tools, they're dehumanized. We have quick appeals to money and bonuses by Parker, for instance. No one makes the mission humanitarian. No one argues that this is a mercy mission, a mission to save someone or something. Parker and Brett are presented as self-serving, even as they point out the class inequities and hierarchy, that the people working above get more money. The critical discourse, though, is submerged, rather than to show Dallas, Cain, and Ash as being willing to play the heroes simply because they have the luxury, privilege, money, power to do so, unquote. Ripley breaks class and gender barriers in her descent, in her fighting against the alien, in her movement downward into the bowels of the ship. Commercial goals are more important to the company than our human lives, as we see. And so you might ask, is there a difference between being portable wombs and being portable feet for bringing in company profit? Is the company the alien in disguise? Gallardo and Smith write that Ripley is, quote, a woman who thwarts her destructive patriarchal desire, faces her shadow self again and again, embraces it, and ultimately incorporates the monstrous feminine into her very being, unquote. Now that is a little bit of a spoiler for following movies. But Ripley, throughout the 4 films, does repeatedly face the destructive mother. As the sacrificial mother, she faces the destructive mother. And so, yeah, and ultimately incorporates the monstrous feminine into her very being. They also write, in terms of the horror narrative, Ripley is a castrated being revealed as open and vulnerable in the final scenes, but also capable of castration. Under these terms, she is equated with the monstrous feminine and pitted against her own monstrous shadow self. The 2 worst fears of the patriarchy meet, the woman who does not know her place, and the all-consuming maw of the creature that represents the womb tomb. In a universe where men can be subjected to the monstrous feminine, become pregnant, and give birth to monsters, where women can become the heroes and sole survivors, the male becomes superfluous, a soon-to-be outmoded form, unquote. David Thompson, quoted in Gallardo and Smith, states, what made audiences scream in 1979, what had some people vomiting as they ran away, was the eruption from within. for I think very few people then foresaw that the monster was going to demand birth from Cain's body. The body seemed more secure then, and the nausea, the gulping and retching, came in the sudden upheaval of understanding of what had been done down Cain's throat, for the man had been made pregnant." Unquote. One might also make the connection between masculine and feminine as a perversion in the figure of Ash, in that the fluid that comes out of him when he is killed looks very much like milk. So this science officer who is supposed to take care of them, so in some ways another figure of the combined masculine feminine in the combination of science and doctor, also represented through this figure associated with the feminine in terms of that milk all over him in that last scene with Ash before they torch him. And to leave you on a more amusing note, here's the parody from Spaceballs of the moment when the alien comes out of Cain's stomach.
Oh no, not again.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
Check, please.